Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Counseling Center at Alexander High School, we'd like to welcome Mr. Ben Meadows tonight for our financial aid workshop. Take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Tonight, what I'd like to do is kind of walk you through the financial aid process, how it works. I do want to keep this open forum, so I do want you guys to ask questions. But if you would direct your questions into the chat at the end of the presentation, we're going to have time to go back and answer the questions that you guys may have. Also, at the end of the presentation, I'll be posting a link where if you guys need help with the application and actual filling out the forms and things like that, you can book an individual appointment. So I'll post that once I get through the presentation. This is a QR code for our Paying for College brochure. If you guys would like to follow along as I go through the content, you're more than welcome to pull up the brochure. Typically, we would be doing these things in person, and I would have brochures to hand out to you guys, but due to the COVID and everything being virtual and digital this year, a lot of that stuff has gone away. So thank you again for your patience. As we start talking about financial aid, one of the terms that you'll see throughout the process, and I do want you guys to be familiar with it, because as you're shopping colleges, and I use that term shopping because essentially that's what you're doing, is trying to look for a school that's in your price point, but also offers the programs that your students are interested in studying. There's a term I want you to be familiar with that's called COA, or cost of attendance. And a lot of times, especially students, when you start looking at different colleges, the price points are going to be all over the place. A lot of things go into that, things like whether it's public or private, whether it's in-state or out-of-state, whether it's a 2-year or 4-year institution. So a lot of things go into the cost. And those price points, will be different depending on what type of college you're looking at. But the term COA, cost of attendance, is kind of it's the term that goes into the financial aid formula, so to speak, but it's the total cost of what you can expect to pay at that institution for a full academic year. If we use terms like tuition and things like that, it's only looking at one aspect of the cost. And so if you really want a total figure of what that school is going to be for a full year, ask what the COA is. And usually that's listed somewhere on the college's website. But cost of attendance includes that tuition and fees, books and supplies, room and board, transportation, kind of the total cost going into that college. And our goal throughout the financial aid process is to identify the different types and sources of aid that are available for students, and to minimize any out-of-pocket cost or minimize any type of loans that may be any loans that may be needed to help pay for school. And so as we move through this information, just know you don't have to know exactly what these scholarships are per se, but anytime you see the word merit-based, automatically know that that's going to have something to do with the student's GPA or SAT or ACT scores. Merit-based scholarships, the Hope is an example of a state merit-based program. Many of the scholarships that are coming from the institutions, many of those are merit-based. And so as you go through these scholarship searches and use the different databases that we're going to talk about tonight, whenever you see the word merit, without knowing anything about the scholarship, automatically know that there's going to be a certain GPA or test score requirement to qualify. Another type of financial aid that we'll talk about are things such as need-based aid. Now, for those of you that have filled out the FAFSA before, you probably know what I'm talking about when I say there's a lot of information that goes on that form. It's looking at household size, it's looking at income, it's looking at assets, it's looking at a whole variety of information. But what it's trying to determine is something that's called an EFC score. And EFC, that stands for Expected Family Contribution. And that EFC is based on the information that you provide on the FAFSA. And so depending on where that EFC score falls will determine if the student is eligible for need-based programs, and if so, how much. So the example given here, that is the Pell Grant. That's a federal grant that's available for students. But again, it's going to be looking at that EFC score to determine eligibility. Now, the sources could vary. It could come from a private foundation. It could come from the institution. But if it's a need-based scholarship or grant, then automatically know that it's going to be looking at your EFC score to determine eligibility for it. And a common question I get from families is, how do we know what our EFC is? Well, when you fill out the FAFSA form, that's an annual application. You do it every October. When you fill out that application, at the very end, you'll get a confirmation page. And on that confirmation page, it will tell you what that student or household EFC is. And so as you're looking through the different sources we're going to talk about tonight, if it says you need an EFC of below 10,000 to apply for this need-based scholarship, you look on that confirmation page. If your EFC is below 10,000, you would know your student's eligible to apply for that. So again, need-based is going to be another type of financial aid. And then there's also non-need-based aid. We're very fortunate to be in Georgia. We have one of the largest non-need-based programs in the nation, and that's the HOPE grant. And this type of aid is awarded strictly based on residency. So it doesn't have anything to do with merit, it doesn't have anything to do with need. It's awarded based on the fact that that student's a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, that student's a resident of the state of Georgia, and that student's enrolled in a HOPE eligible school. That's the only requirements. And so for that reason, they consider that to be a non-need-based program. Typically, you see more of the first two types of financial aid, but again, because we're in Georgia, there's a lot of non-need-based aid available here for Georgia residents. So that's a huge help and advantage to our Georgia students. And then there's also loans. Now, typically this early in the year, I really don't push or advocate loans. Loans are something that we can take a look at once we get closer to summer or that fall payment deadline. And if additional money is needed to help pay for school, that's when we can take a look at some of the loan options. We are going to talk a little bit about federal loans tonight, but for the sake of the student, I really would like to see students applying for more gift aid. And what I mean by that is like merit-based and need-based and non-need-based type programs, money that doesn't have to be repaid. And then there's also federal work study. That's one of the questions you'll actually see on the FAFSA form. Basically where the student could have a full-time or part-time job on the college campus and use that as a way to help pay for school. And then there's also military aid and grant programs for the families that serve, and then Path to College 529 savings plans. 529 is a federal tax code. It's more of a long-term college savings. So if you have younger kids or younger siblings, it'd be an excellent savings opportunity for a college fund for them. But all those are going to be considered to be different types of financial aid that you'll see through this process. Now, under the different types, you're going to notice that there's going to be different sources to pull from. And our goal in this is for students to not only apply for each type, but also apply for each of the sources. And so the one that we're going to focus on tonight mostly is going to be your federal and state aid. And both of those sources are applied for through filling out the one form that we know as FAFSA, which is an annual application. Outside of that, there's also colleges and universities. Now, every school that your student's interested in has some level of institutional funding, whether it's a 2-year college, 4-year college, technical, private, doesn't matter, in-state, out-of-state, all colleges have some form of institutional scholarships. And this is where the process sometimes becomes confusing for students, is that there's not a universal deadline date for all those scholarships. And the reason for that is the college sets their own deadline, and most of the time they set that deadline based on population sizes. So for example, as a general rule of thumb, the bigger the institution, more than likely the earlier the deadline is going to be. And so what I mean by that is everyone's experience through this financial aid process is going to be a little bit different based on where your student wants to go to college. If your student's looking at Division I school like University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, Kennesaw, Georgia State, some of these larger institutions, those deadlines more than likely are going to be earlier simply because they have more applications to process. Now, if you're looking at a smaller local college with a few thousand, those deadlines might not be until spring. But our top priority in all of financial aid, no matter what the type of aid it is or no matter what the source is, we have to meet the deadlines. Typically, that's the number one thing that I see knock students out of qualifying for a scholarship is typically just getting the information in too late. So definitely check with the colleges. Now, keep in mind, these are going to be separate application processes. So this is another application that they'll have to do in addition to filling out their FAFSA in many cases. But definitely make sure that the students applied and going through the application process. That way they have time to apply for a lot of those scholarship deadlines before they get here. Then there's also private foundations. professional service organizations, employers, and private companies that offer scholarships. These are typically found on some scholarship database websites. GAFutures.org is one of those. We have about 20,000 scholarships on our website. There are other good sites that you can use as well. Fastweb.com is a good one, scholarships.com. There's an app that I've heard students using called Scholly, which helps match them up with scholarships. So again, these are going to be national databases. Definitely go on there and take a look and look at some of these different scholarships. One thing I can go ahead and tell the students that are tuning in is that when you start looking at some of these national databases, it's going to feel very overwhelming. I mean, when you're looking at some of these sites that have thousands upon thousands of scholarships, you know, your first reaction is going to be, how do I know which one to apply for first? There's no way I can apply for all these. And the best advice I can give you is be very specific in your search. And what I mean by that is if you're part of any clubs, organizations, athletic associations, religious affiliations, whatever it is that is specific to you, that's the type of stuff that you want to be entering in the search criteria, because what you're trying to do is narrow it down to a scholarship that is specific to you. This is a snapshot of our website. Again, hopefully the students are familiar, but gafutures.org. If you click on the second tab, which is federal aid, and then go down to the scholarship database, that's where you can search through some of those. And then one thing to keep in mind is never pay to fill out your FAFSA form and never pay for a scholarship. If anybody tries to charge you for those two things, it's a scam. So don't do it. Those are two things that should always be free to the student. So definitely take a look at some of those scholarships. Also, you know, your local high schools are going to have a list of local aid. That's businesses and families and organizations right here in your community in the Douglas County area that offer scholarships. And so typically those are going to come in a little bit later. A lot of times we don't see those until later in second semester, but definitely check with your counseling office about any local scholarship opportunities in addition to those federal, state, institutional, and then national scholarship databases. What I'd like to do at this time is kind of walk you through the federal aid. Federal aid falls into two types, which are going to be need-based aid and federal loans. And then state aid covers two additional types, which are going to be your merit-based and non-need-based. So the point is, by completing the FAFSA, the one application, the student has applied for every type of financial aid that's available. And so that's kind of the importance of making sure that students are doing that every year. The most common federal programs are going to be your Pell Grant. This is a federal grant that pays $63.45 per academic year, and that's awarded based on your EFC. So as we talked about earlier a little bit, that EFC will determine if you're eligible for that, and if so, how much. Now, the way the Pell Grant works is it's a sliding scale. So for example, if you fill out the FAFSA, get your confirmation page, and it says your EFC is 0, the student will be looking at that full amount, that's $63.45. And from there, it's a sliding scale. So for example, if your EFC were 1,000, the student would be looking at $53.45. If your EFC were 2,000, it would be $43.45. And so it will adjust that way. If your EFC exceeds a little over 6,000, then the student would be ineligible for that specific need-based grant. Now, your EFC can range anywhere between 0 and 100,000. And so again, that income and assets and household size and all that stuff will determine that EFC. The FSEOG grant, that's Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Not every college receives this grant money. They do have to apply for it. But this grant is given to students that are showing the greatest financial need. So this is going to go to students closer to that 0 EFC score, and it will stack in addition to that Pell Grant. So if you had a student that showing, you know, a lot of financial need, then they could be looking at upwards of $10,000 of federal aid. Now, the other type of federal program is going to be your federal work study. And like I mentioned a minute ago, this is going to be awarded based on EFC. So it does look at that to determine, you know, who's showing the greatest need for it. But it's basically like a part-time job on the college campus where they can use that as a way to help pay for school. Now, when you see that question on the FAFSA form, you know, if you're interested in it, or maybe you hadn't made up your mind if you want to or not, don't be scared to select yes to that because it's not binding. In other words, if you get closer to fall and you decide, no, I don't want to work while I'm in school, you can change your mind. You don't have to do it even if you selected yes. Basically, what that does is just gives you more financial aid options. So again, if the student is interested in working part-time while they're in college, it's an excellent opportunity. I did it when I was in school. I know for a lot of students, it's basically a way to, make a little money and do your homework while you're on the clock, so to speak, in some cases. Because, some of the positions that you see are things like working at the library or sporting events, or as an office assistant in the financial aid or admissions offices. So again, it's nothing too rigorous. And the college knows that the student is there to learn, so they typically work with them on a schedule a lot better than some other places of employment would. So again, if your student is interested in working while they're in school, it'd definitely be an excellent opportunity to earn a little bit of extra financial aid throughout the process. And then the other type of federal programs are going to be your loans. Now, most loans would be in the student's name, but there could be situations where there's loans in the parent's name as well. The first two that you see listed on your screen there, the direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, those are loans that would be in the student's name. The plus loans would be loans that are either for graduate students or loans that would be in the parent's name. Now, common question, why would a parent have a student loan in their name if they're not the ones in school? Well, the subsidized and unsubsidized loans are given in what's called full faith that that student will repay that loan. And the reason for that is they're not based on credit score. Most students coming out of high school haven't established that credit yet. And so even because they're not based on credit score, they cap the amount of loan money students can take out in their name. So if additional money is needed on top of those caps, that's when the plus loans would come in. Now, the main difference between the subsidized and unsubsidized really comes down to who's paying the interest on it. With subsidized, the subsidized loans are awarded based on need. So that EFC score will determine how much subsidized loans they can take out. And the government or taxpayers are paying the interest on that while the student's in school. Now, the interest rate is going to be the same on the subsidized and unsubsidized, which is 2.75%. The difference is with the unsubsidized loan, the student is responsible for both the principal and the interest. And the next chart here will show you a little bit of how much students can take out. So most students that are classified as a dependent going into college, the maximum amount for a freshman would be $5,500. And you'll see that increases $1,000 for each year that they're in school. So $6,500 for sophomores and $7,500 for juniors and seniors. The students that are listed as independent, these loans work the same way. They just don't have that parental support. And so they offer those students that are independent the option of taking out a little bit more loan money if they need it. And with federal loans, the repayment begins 6 months after graduation, or the student drops below halftime, which means taking less than 6 credit hours. So the important thing to keep in mind is this. If a student needs to take out a federal loan while they're in college, they need to maintain at least 6 hours worth of coursework to defer that until after graduation. What's going to happen is if they drop below that 6 hours while they're in school, they'll have to start repayment on that loan. Otherwise, they have 6 months after graduation to secure employment before they would have to start repayment. And they have different repayment plans on that. You can do 10, 20, 30 years. So they kind of work with you in that regard. But typically you have to start repayment on that loan 6 months after you graduate. Now, switching gears a little bit, moving on to some of the state programs. As you know, the HOPE program is funded through the Georgia Lottery, and HOPE stands for Helping Outstanding Pupils Educationally. It's not just one scholarship or grant, it's several different things that fall under what is considered HOPE. But there is a general eligibility that applies to all of the different programs. We like to refer to this as the residency requirement, meaning that the student has to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. They have to be a resident of the state of Georgia, and they have to be enrolled in a HOPE eligible institution. There are a few other requirements there, like you got to stay drug-free, you got to stay in satisfactory academic progress, things like that. But those are the 3 main requirements for the HOPE program. And common question I get from parents and students is, what is a HOPE eligible institution? Well, we have this divided up into 3 different categories on the website: public, private, and technical. So depending on what track the student's wanting to take, you definitely want to check and make sure that your school is going to be on this list. Most of the colleges that your students are interested in are probably already on this list. Just to give you an example of maybe a school that is not Hope eligible, think of something like, let's see, maybe Phoenix University. You guys might have seen the commercials on TV. They have a campus in Atlanta, but their base institution is in another state. That would not be Hope eligible. So again, just definitely refer to the chart on the GA Futures website. You can definitely take a look there. Not only will it show you the schools, but it'll show you exactly to the dollar amount of how much these state scholarship and grant art programs are going to pay at that institution. And they have that divided up from 1 to 15 credit hours, depending on how many hours the student's enrolled in. So the first one I want to talk about tonight is the Hope Scholarship. So this is for students that are on the degree seeking track. They have to be enrolled in a certificate, in a 2-year associate's or a 4-year bachelor's degree. So they have to be degree seeking. And then in addition to that, they would need to have a 3.0 Hope GPA and then 4 units of rigor. Now that Hope GPA is calculated different than the student's overall GPA. So I think that's one of the confusing thing to students sometimes, is that a Hope GPA only looks at those core classes. So it's going to look at things like math, English, natural science, social science, and foreign language. And it's only looking at courses taken 9th through 12th grade. And so the best place that you can check your Hope GPA is again on the GA Futures website. And then in addition to that 3.0, they would need to have 4 units of rigor. Now that's not 4 each year, that's 4 total throughout high school. And so Department of Education has defined that rigor for us as an AP, IB, dual enrollment, advanced math, science, or foreign language course. And some of those advanced courses might not be as advanced as you think. So for example, advanced foreign language could be a 2nd unit of foreign language. So if a student takes Spanish 2, French 2, that would satisfy one of those there. Advanced science could be chemistry. So again, the students, especially that are on this college track, are probably more than likely already meeting that rigor. But if you are concerned about it, definitely send your student by the counseling office and they can make sure that the student is going to be on track to meet those 4 units. So 3.0 Hope GPA in addition to those 4 units of rigor. And again, you can check the student's high school Hope GPA at any time. In fact, they can start keeping up with that as early as 9th grade all the way through 12th. Now, the high school uploads these transcripts usually twice a year. That takes place roughly in February and then again in June after the students graduate. So each time the high school uploads that transcript, it will recalculate that based on that 4.0 scale. So their Hope GPA needs to be a 3.0 or higher in addition to those 4 units of rigor to qualify for the Hope Scholarship. And once they qualify for it, they have to maintain that B average in college in order to keep it. Now you'll notice here is going to be checkpoints. Those are at the end of every spring semester, and then also at the 30, 60, and 90 attempted hours. So that's when they're going to check in college to make sure that the student's maintaining that B average. And if they were to be below that 3.0, they would lose the scholarship, but they do have one opportunity to regain it. So at the next checkpoint, if they bring their GPA back above a 3.0, they can regain that scholarship. But you can only lose it and regain it one time. So if you lose it the second time, that's when they've lost it for good. One thing that I like about the Hope Scholarship specifically is that even if you had a student that was not eligible for the scholarship out of high school, maybe they graduated with like a 2.8 or 2.9, that doesn't mean that they can never receive the Hope. It just means they can't receive it that first year. So with that first 30-hour checkpoint, if they have above a 3.0 when they get in college, even though they were not eligible for it out of high school, they can gain that scholarship once they get into college and continue to receive it as long as they're maintaining that minimum B average. And just like they're able to check their high school Hope GPA, they're able to keep up with their college Hope GPA as well. Again, logging into the gafutures.org account. And then at the very bottom, you'll see My College Hope GPA. You can click that, and that's where the students can keep track of it once they get into college as well. So that's pretty much a wrap on the Hope Scholarship. The second state scholarship program that's available is going to be your Zell Miller. And there are 2 ways to qualify for that. Students that graduate valedictorian or salutatorian are automatically qualified for that scholarship. If they're not Val or Sal, then they would have to meet the academic criteria of a 3.7 in addition to one of those test scores. 1200 on the SAT or 26 on the ACT. Now, in most cases, your Val and Sal are already going to have a 3.7 and test score, so that's usually not a problem. The one thing I want to mention here that's important is maybe some of you have heard that a lot of the USG or colleges in Georgia are waiving test score requirements for this graduating class. And while that may be an exciting and good news for students, one thing I want to stress to you is if your student is on track to being Zell eligible, they still need these test scores to receive the Zell. You still definitely, especially if you have a 3.7 or higher, you definitely want the students to still take the SAT or ACT if they're able to. They have to take that test and get those scores to us before high school graduation. Especially for those students that already have that high GPA, it's definitely worth taking those tests, because even though you may not need it for admissions into some of these Georgia colleges, you definitely will still need it if you're going to receive that Zell scholarship. So definitely don't forget to take the test. I'd hate to see you guys miss out on that scholarship just because you were missing the SAT or ACT scores. So Zell still requires the test scores, even though some of the colleges may be waiving it for admission. So that's one important thing to note. And then once the student gets into college, they need to maintain a 3.3 to keep the Zell scholarship. So 3.0 for Hope, 3.3 for Zell. And just like the Hope scholarship, the same checkpoints apply end of every spring semester, and then also the 30, 60, and 90 attempted hours. Now the scholarships, both Hope and Zell, you can't receive both at the same time, so it's either or, but they both have an expiration date on it, and that's 127 attempted hours, 10 years from the date of their high school graduation or their degree, whichever one of the 3 comes first. The one thing that I do want students to take notice on this slide specifically is that word attempted, 127 attempted hours. I see that catch a lot of freshmen, and for whatever reason, students are excited. They're going into college. They're transitioning from high school. It's an exciting time for them. And sometimes what we see, especially with freshmen, is they get there on the college campus and maybe they sign up for too many hours or too heavy a course load, and get around midterms and realize how hectic and stressful it can be, and they decide to drop a course. If they drop it after that drop add period, it's still being deducted from that total 127. So the important thing to keep in mind is only register for classes that you intend to complete, because what will happen if the student registers for a lot of classes, drops some, registers for more, drops those, they're going to get to that senior year and be out of scholarship money. So that's just one thing to keep an eye on. As most of you know, bachelor programs are around 120 hours of college credit, which gives students 1, maybe 2 classes that they can drop without it cutting into that budget. And then the other thing to keep in mind is they have 10 years to use it, and that clock starts ticking the date of high school graduation. And then the last one is for students that maybe did a lot of dual enrollment or receiving a lot of AP credit coming out of high school. If you end up graduating with that bachelor's and you still have attempted hours left over, unfortunately, the scholarship would terminate at that point. You can't roll it over into a graduate program. So again, whichever checkpoint comes first is when the scholarship expires. 127 attempted hours, 10 years, or their degree. All right, let's talk a little bit about the state grant programs. Now, remember, the grants are considered to be a different type of aid. These grants are going to be considered to be non-need based, which means there's no minimum GPA, no minimum test score, and they're a completely different set of requirements. Now, having said that, you'll notice the scholarships are on the left there, and that's because in order to use the Hope or Zell scholarships, the student has to be degree seeking. In other words, they have to be going after a 2-year associate's or 4-year bachelor's degree. The grants are for students that are taking more of a technical route. So this would be things like certificate or diploma programs, which are mainly going to be found at your tech schools. So for the HOPE grant, even though there's no minimum GPA or test score requirement, the student does have to be enrolled in that certificate or diploma program, and they also would have to meet that residency requirement. Now, even though there's no minimum GPA initially, in order to continue to receive this grant, the student would need to have a 2.0 or a C average after the first 30 paid hours. And these grants pay a maximum of 63 semester hours, which is about 2 years full time. Remember, the scholarships are paying 127. The grants are going to be 63. And the reason for that is most of your certificate or diploma programs are no longer than 2 years in length, and so it's not needed. And so that's the reason they're shorter. The Zell grant is similar, but it's a little bit different in regards to, even though there's no minimum GPA or test score requirement to initially receive it, the student needs to have a 3.5 at the end of every semester or term to continue to receive that grant. If they don't have the 3.5, what it's going to do is default them down to the HOPE grant, assuming they have above a C average. If they bring their GPA back above a 3.5, they can regain the Zell. So again, you can move within the program, you just can't receive both in the same semester. Either you're Zell eligible or you're HOPE eligible, but you can't receive both at the same time. And then the HOPE Career Grant is, this one's very unique because it's the only state grant program that you can use in addition to the others. So you can stack the HOPE Career Grant in addition to the HOPE Grant or the Zell Grant. You can use those two together. And the reason for that is the HOPE Career Grant was started to identify certain careers in Georgia that are in high demand, and to give those students that are going into those high demand fields just a little extra money for college, just as an incentive to go into those fields. There's actually a lot more than these that it apply to. There's over 200 different programs on the GA Futures website that you can use the HOPE Career Grant towards. These are just some of the popular ones that we've seen students do over the past year. As you know, there's been a lot of movie production and things like that that came to Georgia, a lot of film. So that's one of the options there. There's also diesel and automotive technology, aviation, logistics, commercial truck driving, practical nursing, early childhood, welding, computer programming. So as you can tell, it's just a plethora of options here, just kind of across the spectrum. But if you have a student that's interested in more of the technical route, definitely have them check out some of the different options under the HOPE Career Grant, because again, being able to pair this with the HOPE or Zell grant makes up a nice financial aid package, especially for those students that are looking at those technical routes. You know, it depends on how much it pays. You know, it depends on the program that they're enrolled in and how many hours they're taking. It can be just, you know, as little as a few $100. It can be over 1,000. So again, it depends on the program. But again, when you stack it with the HOPE or Zell grant, it does make up a nice financial aid package for them. And then there's also the HOPE GED grant. This is for students that maybe encountered hardships in high school, had to drop out and get their GED. That's a $500 voucher that's good for up to 24 months that they can use at any of the technical college system of Georgia schools. Now, this is a very simplified award chart. There's a much more detailed one on our website, and that's the one that I'd really refer you to. But I put this one on here just because I wanted to show you guys the difference between the HOPE and Zell. So the Zell is going to pay full standard tuition, whether you're on the Zell scholarship or the Zell grant. It doesn't matter whether you're going the degree-seeking route or the technical route. It's going to pay 100% of the tuition, assuming it's public. Now, the HOPE, you'll notice it says a portion of the tuition. And the reason it's worded that way is it will fluctuate year to year based on lottery sales. Currently, the HOPE's paying somewhere between 75 and 85% of tuition at your public colleges in Georgia. We saw a 2% increase for HOPE last year. We get the receipts from the Lottery Commission around April, and so that's when we update the charts online. But again, it's going to fluctuate year to year based on those lottery sales. Now, you can still use your HOPE or Zell at private colleges in Georgia, but you'll just notice it's no longer percentage of tuition. It's just a flat amount. And so those amounts are listed for you there. So definitely check out the award amounts on the GA Futures website. You can search by institution and from 1 to 15 credit hours, and it will show you exactly to the dollar amount of how much you can expect to receive at that specific HOPE eligible school. One of the last state programs I want to mention to you before we start talking about FAFSA and things like that. Again, I really don't like pushing loans. I feel like students need to be pursuing gift aid before we start looking at loan options. But if you need to take out a student loan to help pay for school, definitely take a look at the student access loan. The downside to it is it's only available for Georgia residents at a Hope eligible school. So if you're looking out of state, you might have to look at the federal loans and some other options as well. But this is the lowest interest rate loan of any student loan that I've seen. It's 1% interest. It does require a monthly keep in touch payment, but you can borrow up to $8,000 a year with a $36,000 lifetime. They do prioritize Hope and Zell scholars. So the application runs somewhere from, I believe it's early May through the end of September. So again, if you're, if you need a student loan to help pay for school, this is definitely probably one of the best ones out there. Student access loan is available on the GA Futures website. And then here are some other state programs. For the sake of time, we're not going to get into each one of these, but these are going to be fairly specific to the student or family. So one for Georgia National Guard Service Cancelable Loan. It's basically a scholarship that can turn into a loan if the student doesn't continue or finish their duty with the National Guard. There's a public safety memorial grant for families that were injured or killed in the line of public safety duty. There's additional grant money for those families. Tuition equalization grant, that's basically an additional $900 for students that are looking at a private college. There are Hero Scholarship that's similar to the public safety, except this is going to be for military families. There's a REACH Scholarship that's for students that are identified as high risk in middle school. That's a mentorship program. So if they follow through that mentorship program throughout high school, that's potentially a $20,000 scholarship waiting for them. Some things for engineering education and several things through University of North Georgia for military and ROTC. So again, these are going to be fairly specific to the family and students, but if they apply to you, definitely check out the application for those. They're going to be on the Georgia Futures website as well under Hope and State Aid Programs. At the very top, you'll see the state aid applications, and that's where you can fill out the app for those. All right. One of the last things I want to mention to you real quick is how to apply for all of these federal and state programs. And that's by completing the FAFSA form. So this is an online free application. It releases October 1st of each year. So it is something that you have to do every October, the students in school. One thing to note here, it is free. So don't pay to fill out your FAFSA form. That's something that should definitely be free to the student. There are two ways or two different places you can go to fill it out. If you're doing it from a mobile device, and that's Android and Apple, you need to look for the My Student Aid app, and that's the one that you need to download to do it on that. If you're doing it from your PC or Mac, you can go to the web address fafsa.gov. Just remember it's FAFSA.gov. Don't go to FAFSA.com. They will charge you to fill out this application. So FAFSA.gov. And then there's always two different applications on the website at all times. There's going to be one for students that are currently enrolled in college, and then another one for upcoming freshmen. And so current seniors, if you guys are starting college next fall, you'll want to fill out the 21-22 application. Make sure you select the right one. If you fill out the 2021, you'll just have to go back and redo it. So you want to do the 21-22, and parents, that's going to require 2019 tax information. So if you can go ahead and get some of that information together, it will certainly speed up the process and expedite things once you get ready to fill it out. Now you'll need the social of the parent and student. You'll need those 2019 taxes and 2019 W-2s. You'll need bank statements, investment records, records of untaxed income. That can be things like Social Security or disability, child support, 529 plans. All that's reported on FAFSA. And then you'll need what is called an FSA ID in order to sign the application. Because this is an electronic application, you'll need an electronic signature, and that's essentially what the FSA ID is. Once you set this up, it's going to be the same one that you use every year to log into the application and update it. So make sure it's something that you can remember. You'll need a valid email address and phone number to set that up. And in most cases, both the parent and the student will need to set up their own FSA ID. Now, both parents don't need one, just one parent along with the student. And one tip for students here, if you're getting ready to set up this FSA ID, don't use your high school email. You may or may not have access to that after high school. So this needs to be something, this needs to be an email address that you check on a regular basis. Parents, all the information and correspondence from the college will start going directly to the student email. So you'll get very little information from FAFSA or FSA regarding this. It's going to start all going to the student. As the student approaches the age of 18, we're starting to get in FERPA territory and privacy acts and things like that. And so all the correspondence is going to be going to the student email. So students, is just kind of to stress the importance of making sure that you use a valid email address when setting that up. This is a snapshot of the FAFSA form. As you can see, there's different tabs across the top to show you your progression through the application. You can save it. So in other words, if you start the application, are not able to finish it at one point, you can save it. When you log back into the application, it'll take you right back to where you left off. I believe it saves for 45 days, maybe 60, something like that. So don't delay too much when doing the app. The screen that we're looking at here is the school selection. So this is going to ask you, where do you want to send your FAFSA form to? It will allow you to select up to 10 different colleges on the form. Now, the easiest way that I found to do this is you'll notice it's asking for the city and the school name and things like that. Sometimes if those don't match up, it won't find the college. So if you'll just want to select the state and then hit search, it will show you all the colleges in that state. And then you can sort those alphabetically and just kind of put a check mark next to the ones that your student's interested in. Now, keep in mind that once you submit this FAFSA form, it's going to electronically go to those schools, but those colleges are not going to process this until the student is accepted. So if you haven't started the admissions process yet for those schools, it's something you definitely want to go ahead and get a start on. And then this is the next section you're going to come to is the dependency status. Now, again, in most cases, the students coming out of high school, going into college, are going to be considered dependent. That dependency is determined based on 13 questions. Just to give you an idea of what those questions are like, it's going to be, is a student over the age of 24? Are they married? Do they have kids? Do they serve in the armed forces? Are they a veteran? Are they homeless? Are they in foster care? Things like that. If the student selects yes to any one of those 13 questions, that's what will put them in independent status. If the student selects no to all 13, then that means the parent section is going to be next, and that's where it's going to start asking for some of that income information. Now, when it gets to the financial portion, it will allow you to enter it one of two ways. One, you can do it manually. If you have a copy of those 2019 taxes, you can just plug in the numbers manually, or you can use what is called the IRS data retrieval tool. They implemented this probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It makes the process so much easier. What it does is it links you over to the IRS website, has you verify your identity, and download your taxes from the IRS onto your FAFSA form. It does two things for you. One, it helps reduce errors, so you don't have to worry about keying things in wrong. But also what it does is it helps verify this information for the college, because once you submit it, they have to verify the information you gave them is correct. And they do that one of two ways, either through this IRS data retrieval tool or supplying them with a tax transcript from that year, and they can verify it that way. So again, either way is fine as long as the information gets on the form. But if you're able to use the data retrieval tool, it will certainly speed up the process and potentially get the student the award letter a little bit faster. And so if you'll notice, after you get through the school selection, dependency status, and then parent and financial sections, then you'll come to the end of the application where you sign and submit. This is where both the parent and the student will enter that FSA ID that they set up, electronically sign the application, and then submit. And immediately the student will get a confirmation page to their email address that they listed on the form. This is what you want to hang on to. One is going to tell you your EFC. And so, like we were talking about earlier, as the student's going through the different scholarship databases and things like that and applying for scholarships, that's a common question that you'll see on scholarship applications. What's the EFC for the student or household? And so this is where you can find that information. Also, it will tell you if the student's going to be eligible for any of the federal need-based grants, and then also federal loans. Now, with the federal loans, it doesn't automatically apply those to the student. It just kind of says, here are these loans if you need them. If you don't need them, you don't have to use them. It just kind of shows you on the confirmation page what they pre-approved them for if they were to need it. And then about 3 to 5 business days after submitting that FAFSA, they'll get what they call a SAR, student aid report. And that's just essentially a copy of the form that they submitted to the different colleges that they listed. Now, there are special circumstances. And one thing to keep in mind is hopefully nothing like this impacts your family. But things happen in our lives that are obviously not found on our tax forms. And so that's what this special circumstance situation is about. If there were a change in employment, maybe you're working a different job than you were in 2019, making less money, that's a reason for appeal. If there are excessive medical bills, change in marital status, you had 2 incomes, now you're down to 1. The theme you'll notice here is documentation. The more documentation you have, you can take that to the financial aid office at that school, sit down with them and explain the situation, and they have the power to adjust that and potentially get your students some more financial aid. Stay in good contact with the financial aid and admissions office at your school through this process, because again, if anything like this impacts your family, they do have the power, and they're usually very good about trying to get the student the most aid they can, but they do have to know if situations like this are have impacted your family. So again, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, know that you do have options and you can appeal that. You don't appeal it to FAFSA, you would appeal it to that college's financial aid office. So that's who you need to contact if something like that were to happen. And then once the student has been accepted to the different colleges and sent their FAFSA form to those colleges, then you'll start receiving award letters. And the award letter does not mean that the money's been applied. It's just outlining things for you, saying if you choose to go to our college, here's our costs, here's our COA, and here's how much financial aid your student's eligible for. And you can lay out those little award letters and see which college is going to offer your student the most money. Maybe that might impact their decision in terms of where they go. But either way, additional steps are going to be needed to be taken with the college to apply that money to the student account. Or, you can say, no, I'd like to withdraw my application at this time. But again, the award letters is just kind of outlining the cost for you guys. And lastly, here's some additional resources for you guys. Again, gafutures.org. I wish I had a resource like this when I was in school. It's a huge resource. Keep up with your Hope GPA, not just throughout high school, but college as well. Scholarship database with over 20,000 different scholarships to apply for. It's also how you apply to the colleges, many in Georgia. The college applications are found there. College and career planning, the Georgia College Connector, that's a magazine publication that we put out every year. If you have a student that's still trying to make up their mind in terms of what they want to do, what they want to study, that's an excellent read for them. We pull a lot of information directly from the Department of Labor. And so it'll show them different careers or industries that are experiencing growth versus decline. What type of education is needed to get into those career fields. Some of these jobs are, 6 figures and requires, 1-2 year program. So excellent read for students that are still trying to make up their mind. If you need to contact us directly about your student's Hope or Zell, GSFC.org. And then don't forget, when you get ready to fill out your FAFSA, go to the correct web address, FAFSA.gov. Don't go to FAFSA.com, they'll charge you. And then if your student's looking at out-of-state colleges, sometimes there's different policies and procedures. For example, certain states want the colleges listed in a certain order, just little things like that you might need to know about. So if your student's looking at an out-of-state college, definitely check out studentaid.gov to get you familiar with some of the terms, acronyms, and processes for that specific state. Again, here's our snapshot of our website. Hopefully you guys have visited that already. But if you need some help throughout the process, you know, you get ready to fill out the FAFSA and are confused, need help with filling it out or whatever, feel free to reach out. My information's second from the top on the left. I'm going to be your contact for Douglas County. So, and you can, if you go to the website, you can book individual appointments, and I'll drop that link in here shortly. But again, thank you guys so much for coming out. Dr. Ray, do you have anything you'd like to add before I take a look at some of the questions here in chat?
Okay, Mr. Plumley, let us know if there's any questions in the chat room. Mr. Meadows, we just want to thank you so much for taking the time out tonight, giving us a wealth of information about financial aid, scholarships, FAFSA form, the Hope Grant Scholarship, Zell Miller. We really, really appreciate it. We want to definitely educate our students so that they can be well prepared financially.
Awesome. You're welcome.
So we've got one question in the chat right now. Can you see it, Ben?
Yeah, let's see. Adam asked, he said, my daughter's mother and I are two separate households. How do we determine which parent should fill out the FAFSA for the most aid? So the way they determine which parent you use on the FAFSA form in cases of separated households is they're looking for the parent that contributes 51% to the child's well-being. And typically that's going to be the parent that the child resides with the majority of the time. And if that parent has remarried, then they're looking for the step parents information on there as well. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Great question.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop the link for the individual bookings. So if you guys, again, have questions later on and need help, here's the link that you go to go ahead and make the book. And Dr. Ray, you can put that on your website as well if you want to share that. And I'll be sending a copy of the presentation to you too.
Great. Thank you so much.
The recorded version of this presentation will be put on our website tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes. Under the presentations link on the school counseling website.
Perfect.
Any other questions? Well, again, thank you everyone for coming out tonight and listening to Ben's great information. On behalf of the Counseling Center, we want to thank you so much. If you have any questions, just make an appointment to see your counselor. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.